You've been told Anne of Cleves was so hideous that Henry VIII took one look at her and couldn't perform on their wedding night. History books call her the Flanders Mare, a big, ugly horse of a woman who repulsed England's most notorious king. But what if I told you that was all a lie? A carefully constructed deception that has fooled historians for nearly 500 years. The real Anne of Cleves wasn't ugly at all. In fact, contemporary ambassadors described her as pleasant and attractive. The truth is far more humiliating for Henry. Picture this: January 1540, Rochester Castle. A bloated 300-pound king with a rotting leg wound that stinks so badly his courtiers can smell him 3 rooms away decides to play a romantic game. He bursts into Anne's chamber wearing a disguise, expecting this foreign princess to somehow recognise her true love through mystical instinct, like something out of a fairy tale. Instead, she sees exactly what's in front of her: a fat, old stranger with breath that could peel paint trying to kiss her. She pushes him away in disgust. That moment changed history, not because Anne was ugly, but because Henry's ego shattered like glass hitting stone. The most powerful man in England had just been rejected by a woman who didn't even know who he was, and that rejection would spawn the greatest character assassination in royal history. Here's what they don't tell you in the textbooks. Henry VIII invented the entire narrative about Anne's appearance to cover up his own sexual failure. The king, who'd already beheaded one wife and would go on to execute another, created a lie so effective that we still believe it today. But the evidence hidden in diplomatic dispatches, court records, and recently restored artwork tells a completely different story. A story where Anne of Cleves wasn't the victim of her looks, she was the victim of a narcissistic king's wounded pride. See, when Henry agreed to marry Anne, he'd never actually met her. This was 1539, and England was isolated. Catholic powers threatened invasion. Henry's minister, Thomas Cromwell, desperately needed Protestant allies, and Anne's brother, the Duke of Cleves, controlled strategic territory in Germany. So Henry did what kings do. He ordered a political marriage based on a portrait. Hans Holbein the Younger, Henry's court painter and one of the greatest artists of the Renaissance, was dispatched to Cleves. Holbein was famous for his brutal realism. He didn't flatter. He painted what he saw, and what he painted was a young woman with hazel eyes, fair hair, and delicate features, dressed in magnificent red and gold garments. The portrait that convinced Henry shows Anne looking directly at the viewer with a composed, dignified expression. She's wearing an elaborate headdress inscribed with bonne fin, French for good ending. Ironic, considering what was coming. But here's the crucial detail everyone forgets. When English ambassadors saw Anne in person, they confirmed Holbein's portrait was accurate. Nicholas Wotton, Henry's own representative, wrote that Holbein had expressed her image very lively, meaning it was a true likeness. In 2024, the Louvre finished restoring this portrait, and the revelation destroyed Henry's lie once and for all. Centuries of grime had hidden the truth. The cleaned painting shows a completely different woman, vibrant, dignified, with clear skin and intelligent eyes. Not a beauty queen, but absolutely not ugly. Just normal. Which makes what Henry did even worse. So if the portrait was accurate and Anne wasn't hideous, what really happened that day at Rochester? Let me set the scene properly. It's New Year's Day, 1540. Anne has been travelling for weeks through winter storms to reach England. She's exhausted, probably homesick, definitely nervous about meeting her future husband. She's in a strange country, where she doesn't speak the language, surrounded by people she doesn't know, about to marry a man with a reputation for killing wives who disappoint him. She's standing at the window of Rochester Castle, watching bull baiting, this violent English sport she's never seen before. Blood on the snow, dogs tearing at a chained bull, the crowd roaring with bloodlust. This is her introduction to English entertainment. Then the door bursts open. 6 men in matching cloaks storm in. One of them, massive, limping, reeking of infection and decay, lunges at her. He grabs her shoulders, tries to kiss her. His breath is rancid. His hands are sweaty. He's speaking English, which she doesn't understand, but his intentions are clear. Any woman would have been terrified. But Anne doesn't scream. She doesn't cry. She simply pushes him away firmly and turns back to the window, the universal body language for "leave me alone." She's maintaining her dignity in the face of what seems like an assault. The fat stranger storms out. 20 minutes later, the same man returns, now dressed in cloth of gold, announced as the King of England. And Anne realises her terrible mistake. She's just rejected her future husband, the man who beheaded Anne Boleyn, the man whose moods determine life and death. But here's what makes this even more twisted. Henry had planned this surprise as a test. He genuinely believed that true love would allow Anne to recognise him through any disguise. This wasn't just ego, this was delusion. The king had read too many Arthurian romances where noble ladies always recognised their disguised knights through the power of pure love. When Anne failed his test, Henry took it as proof that she didn't truly love him. Never mind that they'd never met. Never mind that she had no reason to expect him. In Henry's mind, a woman who truly loved him would have known him instantly, even dressed as a common messenger, even stinking of pus and decay. The court watched in horror as Henry's mood blackened. Thomas Cromwell, who'd arranged the marriage, went pale. He knew that look. He'd seen it before Anne Boleyn's fall, before Thomas More's execution. When Henry felt humiliated, someone always paid in blood. But Cromwell was clever. He couldn't undo the marriage. The contracts were signed, the alliance was crucial. So he did the only thing he could. He agreed with Henry's new narrative. Yes, Your Majesty, she's not as pretty as we thought. Yes, Your Majesty, the portrait must have been flattering. Yes, Your Majesty, we understand your disappointment. The entire court fell in line. Men who'd seen Anne and found her perfectly acceptable suddenly discovered flaws. Her nose was too long, her skin was too dark, she dressed strangely, she couldn't dance. Anything to support the king's wounded ego, but the wedding still had to happen. January 6th, 1540. Henry dressed in gold, Anne in silver. The ceremony at Greenwich Palace was magnificent. Observers noted that Anne looked radiant, but Henry's face was like thunder. During the feast, he barely spoke to his new wife. He drank heavily. He kept glancing at a young girl at the far end of the hall, Catherine Howard, the Duke of Norfolk's niece, barely 15 years old. The wedding night was a disaster, but not for the reason you've been told. Henry couldn't perform, not because Anne was ugly, but because he was nearly 50, diabetic, probably impotent, and had spent the evening drinking heavily while nursing his wounded pride. But a king can't admit sexual failure. That would make him look weak, old, less than the magnificent sovereign he pretended to be. So Henry created an elaborate lie. He told his physician that he'd examined Anne's body and found evidence she wasn't a virgin. He claimed her breasts were saggy, her belly loose. He said she smelled bad. He insisted he'd tried to consummate the marriage, but her body repulsed him. Think about how cruel this is. A young woman, innocent of any wrongdoing, has her most intimate physical features discussed and mocked by the most powerful man in England. These weren't private complaints. Henry made sure everyone heard. He wanted the entire court, the entire country, the entire world to believe Anne was too disgusting to arouse him. Meanwhile, Anne was confused and frightened. She didn't understand why her husband avoided her. She tried to please him, learning English phrases, adopting English dress, smiling whenever he appeared, but Henry had already moved on. He was pursuing Catherine Howard openly, giving her jewellery that should have gone to his queen. By spring, Henry wanted out. But here's where it gets interesting. He gave Anne a choice: fight the annulment and probably die like Anne Boleyn, or cooperate and become the richest woman in England. Not much of a choice really, but Anne played it perfectly. When questioned about the marriage's consummation, Anne gave answers of such brilliant, calculated innocence that historians still debate whether she was truly naive or playing a game. She said Henry would kiss her goodnight and say farewell, darling, and she thought that was all marriage required. She claimed complete ignorance about sex. She agreed she was still a virgin. Was she really that innocent? A 24-year-old noblewoman who'd been prepared for marriage her whole life? Or was she smart enough to give Henry exactly what he needed, a way out that preserved his reputation? The annulment was rushed through in July 1540. Henry claimed non-consummation and Anne's pre-contract with the Duke of Lorraine, a betrothal from when she was 12 that had been dissolved years earlier. Within days, he married Catherine Howard. The same day, he executed Thomas Cromwell for treason. The message was clear. Everyone associated with the Anne debacle had to disappear. But Anne didn't disappear. She thrived. Henry's guilt, because despite his narcissism, he knew he was lying, manifested in the most generous divorce settlement in English history. She became one of the richest women in England overnight. More importantly, she was free. While Catherine Howard was being groomed and controlled by her family, while they pushed her into the king's bed knowing what happened to his wives, Anne was hosting parties at Richmond Palace. While Catherine was trembling every time Henry's mood shifted, Anne was learning English, making friends, enjoying her freedom. 2 years. That's how long Catherine Howard lasted before Henry had her beheaded for adultery. She was 21 years old. The night before her execution, she asked for the block to be brought to her room so she could practice laying her head on it. She wanted to die with dignity. Anne sent Henry a letter of condolence. Perfect etiquette, no gloating, just the right amount of sympathy from his beloved sister. She knew how to play the game now, stay visible enough that Henry couldn't forget about her and potentially turn on her, but never threaten or challenge him. When Henry married his 6th wife, Catherine Parr, Anne attended the wedding. She gave expensive gifts. She danced at the reception. Observers noted she seemed genuinely happy. Why wouldn't she be? She'd escaped the fate of every other woman who'd shared Henry's bed. The Flanders Mare insult that everyone knows. Complete fiction. It doesn't appear in any document from Henry's lifetime, not in court records, not in diplomatic dispatches, not in private letters. The first mention comes from Bishop Gilbert Burney in 1679, 139 years after the events. Burnet claimed Henry said it, but provided no source. He was writing a sensational history, not a factual one. Think about how perfect this lie became. It's been repeated in every history book, every documentary, every drama about the Tudors. We've accepted it as fact for so long that even serious historians sometimes forget to question it. Anne of Cleves equals ugly. It's become historical shorthand. But every contemporary source tells a different story. The French ambassador described her as pleasant-looking. The Spanish ambassador called her rather tall and thin, but with a queenly bearing. Henry's own ambassadors confirmed she looked exactly like her portrait. No one, not a single person writing at the time, called her ugly except Henry, and only after she'd rejected him. Even more telling is what happened to the people around Anne. Hans Holbein kept his job as court painter. If he'd really deceived the king with a false portrait, he would have been punished. The ambassadors who approved Anne weren't disciplined. The only person who suffered was Cromwell, and that was more about politics than Anne's appearance. The ladies who attended Anne provide the most honest perspective. These were noble women who spent every day with her, helped her dress, saw her without makeup or fancy clothes. Their letters home describe her as clean, kind, and generous. They mention she gave them expensive gifts and treated servants well. Not one suggests she was ugly or smelled bad. Here's a detail that never makes it into the history books. After the annulment, several European princes inquired about marrying Anne. If she was really so hideous, why would other rulers want her? The answer is obvious. She wasn't ugly, and everyone knew Henry's claims were lies. Anne lived 17 more years in England. She never remarried, probably because she'd learned that freedom was worth more than any crown. She mastered English, adopted English fashion, and became a beloved figure at court. Henry's daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, both adored her. She was the fun aunt who threw great parties and didn't compete for their father's attention. When Edward VI became king after Henry's death, Anne kept her properties and income. When Mary took the throne and began her bloody persecution of Protestants, Anne smoothly converted to Catholicism. She understood that survival meant adaptation. Principles were a luxury she couldn't afford. She died in 1557, probably from cancer. Her funeral was grand. She was buried in Westminster Abbey, an honour reserved for royalty. Her tomb inscription doesn't mention Henry's lies about her appearance. It calls her a most excellent princess. Even in death, she maintained her dignity. The recent restoration of Holbein's portrait is vindication Anne never lived to see. The painting had been deliberately darkened sometime in the 17th century, making her appear severe and unattractive. Why would someone do that? To support the narrative, to make Henry's lies seem more believable. But underneath centuries of grime and deliberate alteration, the truth waited. Anne of Cleves was ordinary. Not beautiful, not ugly, just a normal young woman caught in an impossible situation. And that's what makes Henry's behaviour even more monstrous. He destroyed the reputation of an innocent woman not because she was hideous, but because she didn't worship him on sight. Compare Anne's story to Henry's other wives. Catherine of Aragon fought her annulment and was exiled to die alone. Anne Boleyn tried to give Henry what he wanted and was beheaded on trumped-up charges. Jane Seymour succeeded in producing a son but died in the process. Catherine Howard was manipulated by her family into a relationship that killed her. Catherine Parr survived Henry, but only by constantly walking on eggshells, terrified of his moods. Only Anne of Cleves found the perfect strategy: give Henry what he wanted, an annulment, while making him pay premium price for it. Don't fight, don't argue, don't challenge his narrative. Let him call you ugly. Let the whole world call you ugly. Cash the checks and throw parties with the money. She understood something profound about dealing with narcissists. You can't win by fighting them directly. They'll destroy you before admitting fault. But if you let them think they've won, if you play into their narrative while quietly taking everything you want, you can survive and even thrive. Modern historians have worked to restore Anne's reputation, but the damage runs deep. 5 centuries of being called the ugly wife doesn't disappear overnight. Even now, when you mention Anne of Cleves, people immediately think Flanders Mare, a slur she never heard in her lifetime, invented over a century after her death. The real tragedy isn't what Henry said about Anne, it's that we believed him. We took the word of a serial wife killer about his victim's appearance. We repeated his lies in our textbooks, our novels, our films. We made Anne's supposed ugliness a punchline when the real joke was Henry. Old, sick, deluded, pathetic. But Anne got the last laugh. She outlived Henry by a decade. She outlived all his other wives. She outlived the minister who arranged her marriage and the courtiers who mocked her. She lived to see Henry's legacy crumble, his son die young, his daughters declared bastards, then legitimate, then bastards again. While Henry's body rotted in his tomb, he was so bloated when he died that his coffin exploded, leaking putrid fluids across the chapel floor. Anne was still throwing dinner parties and wearing beautiful dresses. While his daughters struggled with the trauma he'd inflicted, Anne was their safe haven, the one adult from their childhood who'd never hurt them. The portrait tells the truth Henry tried to hide. Anne of Cleves wasn't ugly. She was a survivor who turned a king's lie into her liberation. She let Henry call her ugly because she understood that sometimes the greatest victory is letting your enemy think they've won while you walk away with everything. Want to see how karma finally caught up with Henry VIII? Watch my video on the king's horrifying final days, when his body literally rotted from the inside out, when he became so paranoid he ordered executions from his deathbed, and when his corpse exploded in its coffin. The man who destroyed Anne's reputation died in a way so grotesque, his own courtiers couldn't hide their disgust.